Hey guys, Emo Girl's back with another DIY video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a ruffled cargo skirt, so let's get into it. You first want to start off by trying on your shorts, seeing how big they are on you, how much you might need to take in the waist, and figuring out the length that you will want. So the first thing I need to do is start seam ripping these two seams right here. You want to seam rip up enough to where you're able to tuck and fold to make your seam straight. If you're unable to make your seam straight, then you need to seam rip a little bit more. As well for the back, finally seam ripped all the way down both the ends. We need to seam rip up the middle on the front and the back. Have seam ripped the back all the way up to the point where I'm able to make this straight. So now we're just going to be folding and pinning, kind of following the same folds that were already made. And on the inside, you want to make sure that these two ends are kissing. So this is how it looks on the inside. I'm just going to carefully cut off the excess right there. And so I'm going to zigzag stitch that close and then do the top stitch. Time to pin the back side, and I'm basically doing the same exact thing as the front. Once the front and the back is all pinned, we can go into the inside and zigzag stitch number 4. I'm just going to be zigzag stitching close that excess. So here's how that zigzag stitch looks on the inside. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side right now. So this is how the other one turned out. Now I'm ready to go ahead and do the top stitching. I'm lining it exactly up with the other stitching. This is how the first one turned out. I freaking jumped my stitching.
And I'm so mad about it. I'm literally so mad.
Okay, let's not have a panic attack over this one little stitch. So now I'm moving on to the second stitch. You want to do the same thing to the back. So I have the front side all done, and now I'm going to do the back. So here's how my stitching turned out for the back. Once you have both your stitches all done, we have the shape of the skirt going on. I recommend you guys try on your piece. I'm just going to mark where I want to cut off. And before I get to cutting, I'm going to create my ruffle piece first, taking material from another cargo short. You guys can take material from literally anything. And I'm just going to chop off the legs here. So where the crotch is, I'm really just going to cut straight across. To open these up and use as much material, I'm cutting down the largest seam that I have on my pant here. Seriously. My two legs are cut open. I'm going to line this up and figure out how I want to attach this onto my skirt. Okay, so I'm going to be using this end as the top, and this is going to be the end where I'm going to start creating my ruffles. So before I do that, I have to connect these two pieces right there just to create the very long piece that's going to go all around my skirt. Fold and pin. Like we did earlier on the inside of the skirt, just zigzag stitch the end closed. Once you have your two ends all connected, you can turn your piece right side out, and we're going to start creating the ruffle. I'm not exactly sure how to explain in depth on making ruffles. It's basically a straight stitch. You want to leave your ends hanging out. You don't want to do any back stitching at all. And then obviously I'll show you guys how to pull to create the ruffles, but I'm going to link a video in the description in case you guys want a more in-depth tutorial of making the ruffles. Actually going to end my stitching right here just because I'm running out of thread. When you get to the end, you just want to pull and leave all this excess string and then cut. I switched my thread out back to the gray one, and now I'm going to continue. So once you have your stitching going all the way around, we want to do that 2 more times. And you want to do the other stitches relatively close to these ones. And because I did stop right here and then start again, I'm going to follow the same theme. So I'm going to stop here and then start again. And this is how the ruffled stitching should look like. Grab the 3 threads all from the same side, and then you just want to pull and shimmy it over. For some reason, I thought this would be a great way to take out my anger, and I pulled way too hard and ended up snapping all 3 of my strings. Obviously, I had to stop and then make a new stitch, but I'm gonna just end up folding and pinning it to create the ruched look still. So to start creating the second layer, I'm just going to measure the length at the ends as well as the middle. This is 17.5 inches. And this is 16.5. I'm gonna go with the 16.5 measurement to calculate. You just want to divide your length by 2. So in this case, it would be 16.5 divided by 2, which is 8.25. That will be right here. And make sure I cut all the way across at 8.25. Okay, so now we have our first layer of ruffles and then our second layer that we still have to make the ruffles for. You want to follow the same steps and create 3 straight stitches parallel to each other, leaving the excess thread hanging, no back stitching at all. If your guys' piece is long like mine, I recommend stopping in the middle just like I did at the beginning. Let's get to sewing and creating our second layer. I've sewn on all of the stitching that I needed to, so you guys don't have to start the ruching because we're going to do that later on when we start pinning this. So now we can move on to the next step, which is going to be taking in our waist. I'm taking my seam ripper and I need to first start by removing these belt loops. Because the seam wasn't created in the waistband, I am going to have to cut down the middle just so that way I can fold and tuck under it to take in this fabric. So lined up right where the middle seam is, cut straight down, try this baby on. I'm folding and tucking underneath. Remember to be putting these 2 ends together, and you want to take your pin and pin those 2 edges down. Now that we have the point where we want to take our waist in, we can start pinning. On the back side, I'm really just going to be pulling and tucking this. Pinning all the way down till you get to the stitching here. Once you have your pins going down, try this on again and make sure that this is the correct sizing. Once you're happy with your seam, trim the excess a little bit, make it blend out with this stitching over here. So once you cut off the excess, a zigzag stitch to close this in. I'm gonna go over that 2 times just to ensure that everything's locked in. Kind of have it set up to add on the ruffles, which is going to be the next step. Taking my Sharpie pencil and my ruler, I'm just gonna create a straight line. I'm going to cut along this pocket and go all the way up to where I drew my line. We can start pinning on our ruffles. I want to create my seam where the seam is at the skirt, pin right here on the edge. Once I get around to this end, basically I'm going to fold the 2 ends, make them kiss upwards to create that seam. You're either going to have to loosen it up or tighten it depending on the length of your skirt. Once you have everything pinned, you want to turn it right side out. And now I can go in and start folding and tucking to create my seam right here. Once you get to the end, you might run into the problem where you have a little bit extra material, but it's gonna be pretty simple. You just want to fold in and tuck underneath. And really just line up the seam with the seam that we were making right here. Just do a top stitch. Once you have that stitched on, turn your piece inside out and start cutting off all these strings because we don't need them anymore. They gotta go. With all that out of the way, we could start working on our end seam. A whole hour later, and I finally got the seam to where I want it to be. It was kind of difficult because I accidentally stitched on a part of the seam that I was supposed to sew. So right here, you guys can see I accidentally stitched that down. So I had to work around that and figure out how to pull out and tuck to create the seam. So I'm just going to straight stitch it down and just go right across it, close it off with a zigzag stitch at the top. Let's get back to sewing. I finally finished the seam. It took me freaking forever because I messed up back there like I was telling you guys. So now we're going to move on and start sewing on this pocket. I'm simply just going to lay it flat, start pinning along the edge, and I am going to have to take in the seam right here. As I was showing you guys, I tucked in way too much just to resolve that problem and make it look a lot smoother. So the same way that I was doing the seams before, I'm taking it on the inside just like that, grabbing enough so that way it's all lined up. So I'm going to pin on the pocket as well as the seam right here. I'm going to replicate this stitching right here. Then I can do the inside and finish up this seam just to make everything as clean as possible, even though I did like mess up, whatever, let's get over it.
Get over it already, like, I'll never get over this.
So let's get to stitching. This is how the stitching turned out for the pocket. You guys can see the seam, it's very smooth, it's very nice now. And this is how it looks on the inside. I went over the zigzag twice and then the regular straight stitch twice. And then I also did some more reinforcements on my other seams. For the back seam, it didn't have a straight stitch, so I went ahead and added that. And I did the same thing for this seam that we created at the very beginning. And we are so close to the finish line, guys, so let's keep on sewing. Try this on to determine where I want to create my end seam at. Taking my second layer, I'm also going to line it up just so that way I know the full length of my skirt. But yeah, now that I have my reference, I can start pinning. I just want to do a straight top stitch really close to the edge here. And here's that stitch looking pretty snazzy. So now we can go on the inside and just cut out all this extra fabric. I recommend you guys save this fabric because I'm going to show you guys in my next video how I reuse this to create a little decora piece for the skirt. My excess fabric is all cut out, so now I can pin on my second layer. I want to line it up the same way as the first layer with my break, so this is where I had my break at, keeping everything cohesive. I'm gonna follow the same steps I did with the first layer, either loosening or tightening them in order to fit this all around my skirt. So I'll see you guys once I have that all pinned on. I have finally pinned on the second layer. It took a bit of experimenting. I found it a lot easier to go on the outside and pin on the outside first before you pin on the inside. This time I'm actually going to start sewing with my end seam. I'm going to just do a straight stitch all the way up to the top, making sure I connect the seam from my first layer. Then I can trim off the excess and do my zigzag. Once you have your end seam all stitched up, we can move on to sewing on our ruffles. Just going to be doing a straight stitch. Okay, so now you have your stitching going all the way around, and you can honestly leave it just like this But I'm going to show you guys a little trick on how to hide this stitching. And this also creates more dimension in your ruffles, giving like an even more ruffled effect. And I just feel like it's so cute. So if you flip up your first layer like this, you guys can see I already kind of started sewing a stitch right there. If you just pinch the edge of where you just made your stitching at, you're able to pinch and hide that stitching. You can see the little crease of where you created your stitching, and you just want to sew right along that, and then your stitching will be hidden. So I have that stitching all done. The next step I'm going to take is creating my bottom end seam. Taking the seam that was already created right here, I'm just going to fold that underneath. Then I can do my top stitching just like this one. Can't you guys already see the difference? Like, I feel like it looks so much better with the stitching being the same. And now that we have our two ruffled layers on, time to go on the inside and clean up our work. You want to take your scissors, big or small, and you just want to trim off all the excess fabric. Okay, so I have cleaned up the bottom end as well as the second layer and the top layer. So now that everything is all nice, I just have to add a few more finishing touches. So just replicating the stitching on the zipper and making it line up with the seam I made at the beginning. So now my skirt is all done. However, I am not going to stop here because I ain't no basic Betty. So I am going to add on lots of details, lots of little decor features. So please stay tuned for that. I'm right here!
Yeah, I'm saying don't say kill yourself to maggots. That's rude, Mariah.
Alright, thank you so much for clicking on this video and watching it. Make sure you stay tuned for my next video where I'll be showing you guys how to make little decor features to add onto your skirt. So yeah, see you next time and peace out.